Hi all, this is Skate, and the purpose of this video is to show you a quick preview of the new Chinese heavy tanks which will be arriving in update 4.9. This is not a full branch, it branches off from the medium tank type 58 into tier 7 into the IS-2. So there's 4 new tanks coming. So, IS-2, the first one in the line. I've already got one of these, a premium version. Except we couldn't make jokes about Russian bias if they made this the same. Of course we couldn't. So they didn't make it the same. I'm deadly serious. It's the same tank, but weaker. Well, technically. Okay, so first off, just looks like an IS-2. Gun looks a little bit different. That's the 122mm fitted to this, but yet it does look different. Penetration values are the same, but the hull is different. The hull on the Chinese tech tree has 90mm of frontal armor, yet the IS-2 Premium Russian has 100mm of frontal armor. Also, the IS-2 on this line has 580 brake horsepower, yet the Premium IS-2 has 700 brake horsepower. Where they differ, however, is where this falls more in line with the IS. This thing can fit a 100mm gun, and it's the gun I'm going to personally fit when I play this tank, because you get better DPM, better accuracy, it improves your traverse speed. The only downside is you're making 280 alpha shots instead of 400 alpha shots. But everything else is a plus point. And I did the same thing when I went through the IS. I fitted the 100mm gun because I just think there's too many benefits with that extra DPM, etc. I'm going to cover this really quickly, but pretty much it's an IS-2. It's exactly what we're used to, except it has slightly weaker frontal armor. When you're pointing at the front of it with something like a gun like this one with 175mm, those frontal cheeks are surprisingly bouncy. The upper plate is very weak. The lower plate is very weak and easily penned if you are not angling. Hatch on top, again another weak spot, and if you get a little bit of angle on, you can get ricochets, and you should be side scraping with this thing. You can see the side of it, the tracks do absorb it surprisingly well. So again, the same as the IS, the same as the IS-2, it's just a case of side scraping up. The turrets, by the way, not as strong as you'd expect it to be, and not as strong as people think in their heads this tank is. I mean, you can fire through the cheeks of the turret, or you can just fire straight through the gun mantlet. Either way, they both go through reliably and consistently. So this thing's pretty much the stepping stone to learning how to side scrape, etc, etc. We all know that Commander's Hatch is a weak spot. So I'm going to skip on to the next tank, the Tier 8 Heavy 110. And it's an interesting tank. I also think it'd be a pretty good tank, providing it's played correctly. But we'll go through that in a second if we just have a quick look at the garage area of the tank. The very first, very notable thing is the top tier 9 gun on this tier 8 tank is a 100mm gun. Without rammer, without provisions, we've got a 7.19 rate of fire. And why am I skipping through that so quickly that I can't even read it? Okay, 215mm of penetration, 310 alpha. So without any provisions, without your rammer, you're looking 2,228.9 DPM. Now you can fit the 122mm, which is a tier 8 gun, but why would you when you can fit a much better, higher DPM 100mm gun? Also, to give you a comparative, IS-5 has 2000 DPM, IS-6 has just under 2000 DPM, T-34 American Heavy has just over 2000, T-32 2160, that's with a rammer by the way, Tiger 2 2100 with a rammer, Chieftain with a rammer 2300. So you can see this thing is already going to be a top dog when it comes to tier 8 DPM. Well, when we're comparing tier 8 heavy to each other anyway. And then the other thing about it is the armor is pretty good, all things considered. It's got 2 upper plates which are very, very aggressively angled, so when you're pointing straight on, they are very, very effective. They are 120mm, but to make those 2 effective, you need to be pointing at someone directly straight. But then the downside of that is that lower plate, it is huge, and it is a massive, easy weak spot. If you look at the turret has over 200mm of frontal armor, and it is also very, very well sloped. So this thing is going to be fantastic hull down. One other thing which surprised me is The gun depression, it's not as bad as you may think. Gun depression, although we can't see it in the garage on the test clients, it looks to be around 6 at my guess. With that 100mm gun, it could even be 7, but it's very surprising, especially for a tank like that. Next thing I want to look at, though, is the WZ-111 version 1 to 4. So we're just going to call it the WZ-111. The first obvious, ridiculously striking thing about this tank is the size on its gun. I'm looking forward to this tank. It looks very, very good fun. And that thing is strapped up with a 130mm gun. Now what that does mean is we are trading our DPM at this point. So when you go up to tier 8, you're dropping DPM. You're only going to get 2056 DPM without a rammer with that gun. However, that gun does 460 alpha, which does set it apart from the rest of the tier 9s. So this thing's going to pack a punch when it comes to heavy tanks brawling. Now in terms of hull armor, this thing's got 120 on the front, which is the same as what an IS-8 would have on the front. Except this thing has 120 on the sides, and it's got some spaced armor on the side. An IS-8 only has something like 80mm on the side of the hull. That's quite a difference. Also, this thing is a lower slung hull, which means that the front plates are more aggressively angled. But if you're pointing down on it because it's lower, it's going to be easier to penetrate. If you're pointing straight at it, it's going to be harder to penetrate. The turret frontally on this is very good. 230 on the front, 120 on the sides. However, the back only has 60, which means most heavy tank guns you come across, every tank destroyer gun pretty much, is going to penetrate you with HE in the back of the turret. That may to some seem like a trivial thing, but I actually think it's a big deal, because there's a lot of big nasty guns up these tiers, and they can easily penetrate you. You look in things like a grill being able to penetrate you for 1000 damage, E4s, same tier, Borsigs even, lower tier. Even tier 8 heavy tanks with 122mm guns, which let's be fair, there's a lot. You look at ISs of every range and size, they have enough penetration to go through the back of the turret on this thing with HE. That's something that you need to pay close attention to, because although, yeah, you're not shooting things behind you, things can shoot you from behind, and they can really wipe you out quickly. Now, if we have a quick look at the frontal hull, you can pretty much penetrate anywhere on the front when we are at this sort of position. We're pointing down on the tank. I'm asking him to give us a twirl, he's giving us a shake, but you can still see the cheeks, well, they're both still pennable. The turret is really, really strong. 2 big weak spots on top, as you would expect. It has an MG, it looks cool. I'm looking forward to this tank, it's going to be an interesting one. Also, gotta say a thanks to Ashino from the Blitz post, who is in the other tanks in this video, helping me out to have a look at the armor and review the armor. He runs the Blitz post, which basically provides you lots of hot off the presses, up-to-date news as a Discord group. I've put a link to his Discord group in the video description. Also, one thing I want to note. I showed you the back of the turret on this thing earlier. Now, if I switch to the HE now, I can't penetrate it. And the only difference is, he is running the extra equipment. That's it. So the extra equipment has made the difference, the armor equipment, sorry. So you know you got the choice between extra hit points or that extra percentage of armor. It does make a difference, it seems. Because in this circumstance, the only thing we changed was he put that bit of equipment on. So now I can't penetrate him with my HE. So I wanted to point that out for those who are considering this tank or want to get this tank, which, let's be fair, at this point, watching this video, there's probably going to be a lot because it's a new tank. That is something worth considering. And then finally, the last tank we're going to have a quick look at is the WZ-113, the tier 10 Chinese heavy tank. And it's a bit of an odd one, but I like it. I hated it at first. We played with this on test, and it had god-awful gun depression, and that has been adjusted. They've also upped the rate of fire on this thing. I'll cover the gun in a second. It's got 2,000 hit points, it's got 120mm of frontal armor and 120 side armor, and it's very aggressively sloped. It's got 260mm of frontal turret armor and 160 on the sides. In other words, the armor on this thing is very, very good. In terms of firepower, it also is very, very good. without a rammer, I have a 7.19 reload. That's without provisions as well, by the way. So that gives you completely standard without equipment or provisions, 2,876 DPM. That's a fair chunk for a tank with this sort of armor. Which means if it's got great DPM and it's got pretty good armor, it's going to suck in terms of mobility. Now, we're not talking mouse sort of mobility. It's not... The mobility is not that bad, but it can be frustrating. What's interesting about this tank, though, as I said, it is a very, very low silhouette, and it has fantastically good troll armor. The upper plate on it is great. You can see the lower plate is a weak spot all day long. Put an angle on that upper plate, though, side scrape this thing, and you are going to be golden, especially with that DPM. Just to touch on the DPM again, it has been buffed from when this thing was in test. In test, if you look on, for example, Tank Compare, it will show the old DPM. In this circumstance, I have equipment on now, I have a 7.3 second reload. Which means when 4.9 hits, if this thing remains the same, it's going to have 3,200 DPM with all the equipment and all the bells and whistles fitted. You're actually closer to 3,300, it's 2,287 to be exact. So that DPM is going to make one hell of a difference. In fact, this has got more DPM than a lot of tier 10 medium tanks. And it has the armor to back it up, providing nobody is pointing down on you. That is the thing with this, because it is so low. It's got great aggressive angles on it. However, when you're pointing down on it, those angles don't matter. So if you can get close to this thing and you can point down on that upper plate, well, it's an easy pen all day long. It's not an easy pen when this thing is at some form of range. Also, the side of the tank, you'll see I'm trying to hit the side of it on purpose to try and show you some examples. It's very, very troll. It absorbs a lot of shots. Even in circumstances where it says I can pen, sometimes I'm not. So you are looking touch and go on the side of this thing. Again, same with the rear of the turret though. Easy pen with HE. I can't penetrate the rear butt on this thing with HE, but look at the back of that turret. It's at the top this time. Again, something when it comes to Death Stars are going to love you. Centurions, FE4202s, they're just going to feast on the back of that thing if you let them have those shots anyway. So you've got to be very cautious of that. I mean, even here, look, he hasn't even got the flat back of my turret yet, and he still managed to penetrate it 491 with HE. But that's pretty much it for this video, guys. IS-2, I don't think it's going to be as good as the premium version, although you can fit a 100mm gun. I don't know how that happened. I managed to finish him off. The tier 9 and tier 10 is where it's going to get interesting, though. But this is just a preview. As soon as these are available, I will test them properly in some games. Thank you all for watching, guys, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.